Hello, welcome to the Basketball Soapbox, episode 35. If you like what you're seeing, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe as always. And in this one, we're going to be talking about interviews around the NBA recently. There's been a lot of talk about the NBA MVP races, NBA season winding down. Only like 2 weeks left to go. So far, I feel like everyone's kind of talking about that. So I wanted to touch base on these couple of interviews that happened in the NBA, especially around with Damian Lillard, Kevin Durant, and Ja Morant. Damian Lillard joined JJ Redick on the Old Man and Three podcast, where he talks about basically his career, his shooting prowess. I'll get into that, and especially ring culture, which I think is very important in how the state of the NBA currently is with rookies and vets and things of that nature. Kevin Durant, via his ethics podcast on the Boardroom, talked about Bronny James, a little late Yachi, but I wanted to touch base mainly on what he talked about addressing Charles Barkley and his comments recently, just over the past couple of years, especially the bus driver comments, which we'll get into as well. And finally, Ja Morant sitting down with Jalen Rose there, basically explaining the past transgressions over the past couple of weeks, especially the live gun situation in Colorado and all that situation there that I haven't really touched on. But again, if you guys like what you see, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let's get started into it. So we can go into JJ Redick's podcast, having Damian Lillard on for the second time, which was a very good podcast. I suggest everyone go and watch that and see Damian Lillard, who's probably one of the best interviewers in the NBA in terms of just talking about skill and where the state of the NBA is. And over the course of this, they talked about his scoring prowess. Of course, he had a big showing in the three-point contest in Utah. And they talked about his shot and how kind of his fingers is off on his release in terms of shooting the basketball. But just the way that he breaks down the game and today, how he scores off pick and rolls, how he knows that he has to be aggressive in certain situations, of course, with a bunch of injuries happening to Portland over the course of the season, obviously them fighting for a playoff spot. And basically he said when he scored 71 in Houston, he can tell by the first 8 points of the game that he had that he knew he was going to have a big night, like maybe he can get 50. But to get 71, kind of like Donovan Mitchell there and really score like that, it just the way that he breaks down the game, that he's able to see where the pick and rolls are coming, how to attack it, kind of splitting it, and kind of just being a crazy volume shooter. They also talk about his range in that section about where he basically crosses half court and he's able to let it fly. He feels comfortable doing that. And Damian Lillard, one of the best scorers in the NBA, probably at the guard position in the NBA, and just the way that he scores the ball off picks and rolls, that he's able to shoot the ball really well. And especially JJ Redick said it's dumb that NBA defenses play drop coverage against these guys that can launch like that. Steph Curry's, Damian Lillard, Donovan Mitchell, guys that can really get their points off, get their buckets off. It just really speaks to him and how Damian Lillard puts in that work to be one of the best scorers in the NBA, and kudos to him, one of the more entertaining players. They also talked about his, which I thought was awesome, his game winners as a rookie against Houston, and then his game winner against OKC, against, of course, shooting over Paul George, saying that's a bad shot and stuff like that. And he said that the one that against Houston, against the James Harden, Kevin McHale, Dwight Howard, Houston Rockets, that one meant more over than the big OKC shot where he was like, yeah, there was a lot of trash talking in that series, but he said there was no ramifications on that one, where the game was tied, they could have went to OT, whatever the case may be, they were up 3-1 in that series already. So to hear him talk about the one in Houston where he was like, we had no shot if we were going to Houston in Game 7. We had no shot. They were up 3-2. But if he missed that shot, he knew that if they went to Houston, that they wouldn't have won that series. So to hear him put that in perspective, and seeing Damian Lillard, of course, at that time as a young boy in the league, really saying, hey, that shot meant a lot more than the other one over OKC, was interesting perspective, and I thought it was cool to hear from him talk about that in depth. And I thought that was awesome for JJ Redick, for those guys to bring it up and talk about that as well. Moving on, I thought this was one of the biggest things he was talking about, the NBA losing its values and kind of losing his, he doesn't know how long he's going to play if it continues to go like this, where he talks about the mindset of young players in the league. And a lot of them are coming into it where, of course, high draft picks are given the franchise, given the keys to the league, like to the team and their franchises that they get drafted to, which is interesting because I'm like, yeah, of course, when young guys are drafted, they're in that position for a reason. The roster, the franchise needs saving. They draft a high lottery pick. That's the whole point of that. When the Blazers drafted Damian Lillard, I believe it was 6 that was in a trade with the Brooklyn Nets for Gerald Wallace, I believe, which they truly regret at this point, especially knowing Damian Lillard, what he has done for Portland, what he could have done in Brooklyn on the East Coast. But the way he talked about how you had to earn your spot. And a lot of guys don't really have to do that, which is understandable. And I understand that point from the mindset, right? Like vets aren't going to give you anything on that point in time. But also talking about how rookies' mindsets in terms of when they have a bad game and then the team says they have to practice. Some of them are kind of like hesitant to go practice or just they're upset about going to practice and not understanding that's the grind and how things work, right? In the NBA, and that's understandable. Young guys that have been babied in college and AAU, et cetera, have a different mindset of, wait, you got to earn and grind every day to get this right. It's a repetition of that. And Damian Lillard speaks on that, but he says that's the missing point of not having vets on the team. And I think that was a very interesting point that he brought up as well in terms of having vets on NBA teams. Like I can remember Tree Graham was playing in Orlando, Robert Parrish playing in Chicago and Charlotte and those natures after his Celtics run. A lot of these guys get pushed out the league, like guys that come to mind, Carmelo Anthony, maybe they don't want to be in that role, but now they are in that role. The Dwight Howards, Melo Anthony's, lots of guys that have been pushed out the league probably too soon. That could help a lot of these young teams basically steer their young guys in the right direction, kind of teach them how to be a pro, teach them how to have the repetition and put in the work every day. A lot of these teams don't have that. Eric Gordon talked about that in Houston, where it's like, you know, man, they just run a rug shot down there. And I can understand that from both sides, where you kind of need those veterans to lead them. But in the terms of what these franchises are doing, hey, we're going to tank, we're going to bottom out and let these young guys get the reins. And I completely understand it from that standpoint. Yo, get your stats right now. Get whatever you want. Rather than coming into Portland, I think Dame Lillard's when he came in, he had LaMarcus Aldridge on the roster. You know what I mean? He had veterans on the roster, Mo Williams and stuff like that, Earl Watson, other guys like that. So it's like it's completely different dynamic. That's a paradox in the NBA and where the state of your franchises are, which I think was a very interesting point. And when you think about those guys, how, from the NBA standpoint right now and how the league is working right now, I think it's rather than having those veterans, and they spoke to Udonis Haslem, who has gotten a lot of flack for not retiring or whatever the case may be, not being a coach. He's basically an on-court coach, on the roster team coach, kind of try to keep things together on that side. But from the NBA standpoint, it's like, hey, we're going to give that guy a G League roster spot. We're going to have some guys just play at the rotation. But it's very interesting. A lot of those guys don't really get to play unless they're in injury situations or whatever the case may be. But you can even see it in Golden State, right? With you have an old guy like Andre Iguodala who's on the roster. Why is Andre Iguodala on the roster? Basically to mentor those young guys and try to keep the ship despite how their season is going, especially on the road. That holds value to a team. And I think that's something that Damian Lillard talked about, where that is definitely losing perspective in the league. A lot of the older guys, especially on TNT, when you watch them, they talk about how NBA teams should have a liaison, a guy that really mentors the team as a veteran leader, how to talk in the media, how to go about stuff. And I think that's very important. I think it's a subject that the NBA has to take a look at. Maybe some teams will start doing it. But, of course, the NBA is going to see it as a business, right? Like they're going to look at that and see, hey, we need that can be a playing spot. We can see what a guy has late in the season or whatever the case may be, rather than giving it to a veteran on the 14th, 15th man on the roster spot and really just develop our guys younger. A lot of G League guys don't really translate like that anyway. A couple do. You have a couple guys that came out of there, like a Draymond Green, for instance, and others. But it's like a lot of the times I feel like that roster spot, like Damian Lillard said, could go to a veteran, could go to an older player that basically been there, been through the ropes, been through the grind of the NBA. Because they always talk about when you are, if everyone's 24, who's really learning from each other? Maybe iron sharpens iron. Of course, when you talk about the Boston Celtics in terms of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, how those guys play together every day, they kind of sharpen each other. They go after it. That's different. But in terms of what leadership on these bad teams when you're losing, when everybody's 24, basically playing for stats, how does that build any culture, build any winning. And you're just wondering where the state of the NBA is going with that, especially when you don't have these veterans or older guys on the roster. It's really just young teams around the league that just don't have that aspect of that team. Maybe there's somebody there on the coaching staff or whatever the case would be. Maybe they're there that we really don't know about. But day to day, on the plane, on the bus, on the travel, that's not really there anymore. And that, I think that was a very interesting point that he brought up, talking about that in the league. Finally, ring culture. This has been a crazy dynamic, especially with Damian Lillard in Portland, how people view his loyalty to the Portland Trailblazers, really not wanting to leave and wanting to build in Portland. And he talks about that, where he says he kind of came into the league at that point where super teams or multiple stars are on the same team, teaming up and winning, right? So you look at Miami when he came into the league, they were kind of running their course. Boston's Big Three, Golden State when they got Kevin Durant. All these teams are basically trying to add duos and add other stars, add more depth in case of that. And he says that that's not really his thing, and I can understand it from both sides, where he said the grass is not always greener, and that you'll look crazy if you go somewhere else and you don't really win. That doesn't pan out. And some people say that he's basically running around from the grind, right? Kind of what he said about Paul George basically getting traded from place to place and going to compete and try to stack up and win championships. I get it from both sides, where people are saying, well, he's running from the grind, wanting to stay in Portland. Like, nothing's going to really happen there. Why isn't he going to try to maximize his career? And he basically says maximizing his career is basically being the best every day that he can be. He likes the competitiveness, going back and forth, that guys. And I've been on the record saying that, yeah, Damian Lillard should leave Portland, right? Like, they haven't done him any favors in terms of building a team around him, giving him a chance. I thought they had some earlier years where they could have added some pieces around here. They had CJ McCollum and him younger, but they were going into Oracle scoring 40 a piece on the road in the playoffs. Like, I thought that was a big sign that they should have done something more there, right? And that was the time when they had Evan Turner, Alfred Camino, the other guy there, Maurice Harkless, where I thought they desperately needed an upgrade as a third scorer or somebody there that can really help them get over the hump. And I just feel like that was a missed opportunity in Portland Trailblazers history. I think he's been to one Western Conference Finals, if I'm not mistaken. But he has had a lot of first-round exits, especially with Terry Stotts and stuff like that. So it's like Portland really hasn't done them any favors. I thought they should have broke up him and CJ in their backcourt, because I thought that dynamic of just two offensive guards who don't play defense, that's not going to work in the NBA like that unless you have tremendous defense around you and scoring around you that they just never possessed there. And especially being Portland, that's a small market, I didn't see it. But the same people that were championing his calm to people teaming up, that he's not about that back in the day, it used to be a couple stars that led a team and stuff like that, kind of like what we're seeing right now, that really led a team and really built that way and built it kind of more of an organically way. And people are championing his comment and saying, yeah, he's right. And basically that's just basically to take a dig at Kevin Durant, LeBron James, guys that have been around, Anthony Davis's, Paul George, guys that kind of try to maximize their opportunity to win, trading, leaving their respective franchises to go win. And people are championing that. But at the same breath, those are the same people that sit there and criticize Damian Lillard for not winning in Portland, saying that he's not on the level of Steph Curry, saying that he's not going to win in Portland, saying that he should leave Portland. So the same people that are saying that, championing his comments about ring culture and how people are chasing rings and stuff like that, but in the same breath, criticizing Dame Lillard for not winning. It's a crazy paradox, right? Like, it's a crazy paradox out that people try to criticize him on one end and then champion his comments of what he's saying. It's like, which one is it? And then he basically said, JJ Redick said, you're basically going to get criticized regardless of whatever you do. It's a no-win situation. All you can do is try to, and they talked about how they try to maximize the most that they give to the game, and that's how they generalize success. Like, Damian Lillard has done it all. He's an all-star, has big contract, shoe endorsements, really led Portland in terms of where they were looking for a franchise player, excuse me, to lead that point. And just to think about how Damian Lillard is viewed in the league and how people crap on him for not leaving and saying that he's not a winner, but in the same point, you're basically championing what he's doing while criticizing him. That doesn't make sense to me. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why people look at Damian Lillard the way they do. And it's like, it's not really necessary. And I feel like they really talked about how maximizing and trying to get the most out of the game and loving the competition. I thought that was good to hear from these guys that are different levels of the spectrum, right? Like JJ Redick at his best was a role player. I think that he joked in there. I think Damian Lillard said, I think they said Damian Lillard has, I forgot, like 12 or 13 40-point games that he passed Jordan in that. And then JJ Redick said, hey, I had one 40-point game in my career. So it's just kind of cool to hear the perspectives of Damian Lillard, who's a franchise player all-star, and then JJ Redick, who's a role player. So you're getting different perspectives on how that is viewed. And it was just a good interview. I suggest everyone go check that out and basically try to understand what ring culture really is. And I can understand it from both sides, where Damian Lillard, I kind of think of him like a Reggie Miller, or in terms of Malone and Stockton, kind of of that cloth of really not going anywhere else, trying to do it. Because I think that's another thing I wanted to touch on, is that it's kind of similar to Reggie Miller, right? Like Reggie Miller talked about in one of his interviews, Beyond the Glory. I believe they used to do a series on Fox Sports, which was awesome. I suggest people check that out as well, where he could have had a chance to go to LA. And I think it was 97 when they burned his house down in Indiana. Like Reggie Miller had put so many years into Indiana, and for them basically to burn his house down, all that stuff happening in Indiana. And people were saying, yo, get out of here, go to LA. And at that time, Shaq was in LA. So that just made me think about like Reggie Miller and Shaq playing together, and Reggie Miller's ability to get to the finals at that point. And they had a young Kobe Bryant, how that would have worked. And just thinking how that would have worked out, right? And he didn't go anywhere. He stayed true. He actually got to the finals with Indiana, eventually overcoming the Knicks, and got to the finals. Unfortunately, ran into Shaq and Kobe in 2000, right? So it's like, it's just interesting how to look at it, where you have players that move around because it's like, yo, we're going to go try to win. LeBron James is obviously the creator of that, of this generation, even though it's happened long before that. But in terms of your management, and this is how I compare it, is where your management is not giving you the tools to maximize your potential in the league, right? Like, I don't feel like Portland has put the right pieces around Damian Lillard to compete via trade aggressively enough, via a free agency enough. I feel like they haven't done that. That's similar to what happened in Cleveland, right? Like, Cleveland missed out on so many free agents, so many trades, holding J.J. Hickson not to get Amari Stoudemire, so many things that we can go into. But LeBron ended up leaving and got a championship, and is viewed differently than other players because of this free agency move that he made. Damian Lillard hasn't really been in that situation, and he's basically committed to Portland. I believe he re-upped for 2 more years. I believe the option was, or whatever the case may be, signed an extension, I should say. So it's just different perspectives of how you look on it. And I think the interview was awesome. I thought it was awesome just to hear from Damian Lillard during this time, especially where he talks about his aggressiveness lately, just as in scoring and really trying to fight for a playoff spot. And it's like, for me, Portland has to do better. Yeah, you have Anthony Simons, who's developing into a nice guard. You have Shaedon Sharpe, who has a lot of potential. Hopefully those guys can kind of help Dame in that regard. But in this time, it's just like Portland has not done them any favors. And I really hope Damian Lillard can win, because he's one of the best players in the NBA in terms of scoring, one of the best guards in the league. And when you really think about how they talked about how he's at peace with that, like, if he doesn't win, like, not that that's okay, but he's playing to win and play for stats, but he's like, I'm gonna do it my way, you know what I mean, and wear it on his sleeve. It's gonna be on my back, like, that's how I'm gonna do it. And you have no choice but to respect that, especially as a person who's a leader as a franchise and competing every day and really going after it. And I've never felt like Damian Lillard sold the game short or any point like that. So it's like, really hope he does well, and hopefully something pans out where he gets a free agent or somebody goes and joins him and tries to get something done, because the culture that he's built there, the way that he's worked on his game, you can do nothing but respect that. Absolutely nothing but respect If you like what you're seeing, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe as we move on to Kevin Durant, basically on his ethics podcast via Boardroom, talking about a bunch of things, Bronny James, where he fits and how he wants him to go to college and get that experience, and thinks that would help his game on the next level, little Yachi interview that he did, and stuff like that. But most importantly, I wanted to address the Charles Barkley comments. And basically, they lead into the bus driver comments that Charles Barkley made, basically alluding that, hey, you know, some guys are the leader of the bus, driving the bus. And basically, Kevin Durant going to Golden State, yo, you joined something that was already going on. And I understand it from the dynamic that Charles Barkley was saying, basically not saying that he wasn't a leader, but you kind of joined something that was already good. Something that was already a proven commodity, where that was Steph Curry's team, his leadership, Draymond Green. Like, they had an infrastructure there that you joined and basically were a passenger on that. You know, you didn't build that on your own. And it's kind of a paradox because, you know, Charles Barkley did leave, go to Phoenix, got to the finals. He was the best player on that team, got to the finals, and then they didn't win. And then he went to Houston, tried to join up with Clyde and Akeem Olajuwon at that point, later stages in their career, but basically they were saying he was ring chasing. And the bus driver comments kind of made sense to me because I've always said about Kevin Durant, you add, basically like the league said, you add Kevin Durant to the Golden State Warriors, it was automatic that they were going to the finals, right? And they had a chance to win 3 finals. They got 2 championships. They got a chance to win 3 finals, right? So when you think about that run there, and it's like, you kind of already joined a commodity there where they kind of need, and I always say this, you kind of just needed you to make the shots that Harrison Barnes missed in the NBA Finals, that Andre Iguodala, Sean Livingston, Harrison Barnes missed in the NBA Finals. You add Kevin Durant, who's a 30-point per game scorer, 50, 40, 90 almost every year, on the verge of that. It was automatic. That's the point that people were trying to make about those comments there, where people are saying, yo, you joined something that was already a commodity that already did it. But on the aspect of what Kevin Durant said in the interview, he was like, yo, man, that's a team accomplishment. Yo, that's a team thing. It doesn't matter who's the best player, who's the leader, or whatever the case may be. And Kevin Durant has this way of talking in his interviews where it's like, okay, I understand that standpoint completely, right? Like, it is a team effort, right? Like, it doesn't just take one person to do that. But then you went to Brooklyn and try to lead your own team, and that flamed out. That's the reality of that. You tried to lead that on your own and try to build something on your own with Kyrie Irving. Yeah, it was Kyrie Irving, whatever the case may be, but you were the top guy on that team. You're going to get the brunt of that. Where in Golden State, you were not going to get the brunt of that. Maybe if they lost, people would have been like, hey, you failed, or whatever the case may be. But under the circumstances of the injury and stuff like that, that was understandable. But the bus driver comments, people like to try to ignore that and try to act like that doesn't matter, or whatever the case may be when it comes to Kevin Durant. And it's just like, when you think about, well, when I think about my top 10 of NBA players, you think about the main thing to me is, were you a leader of your team? That's the main thing. In Oklahoma City, you were the leader of that team. You didn't get it done in Oklahoma City. That's fine. But when I think about the top 10 players in the NBA history, I think about, did you lead your team? So my top 10 goes Bill Russell, Kareem, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Kevin Durant, Shaq, Wilt Chamberlain, and Hakeem Olajuwon. People are going to have a problem with that, whatever the case may be. I generally say, people say Kobe's not in your top 10. I just, in the history of the game, I believe forwards and centers have a bigger impact on the game. And I'll explain that sometime down the road. But all those guys were leader of their teams. Outright leaders of their team. That's how I look at the bus driver comments. That's how I look at when Charles Barkley talks about guys who have led their teams, been the number one guys, everything fell on them. That's how I look at it. That's how I look at the bus driver comments. And that comes in when ranking players. And maybe Kevin Durant doesn't care where he's ranked, or whatever the case may be. But that stuff matters. That stuff matters in the history of the game, of ranking players, legacies, like that stuff matters in the history of the basketball. Maybe you don't care. That's fine. But as people analyze and people look at the history of the game, that stuff matters. That flat out matters. I don't care what nobody says. That stuff matters in the game basketball, period. That stuff matters. It does. And I think Kevin Durant gets lost in that, and he's trying to find his way about that. And maybe Kevin Durant won't be that cloth of player. Is he a top 20 player of all time? Absolutely. There's no question about that. I feel like he's in that category. Inching maybe towards that second tier of 10, 15, inching that if he plays a couple of awards, he's able to get another championship, finals MVP, whatever the case may be. He's of that cloth. And I think Kevin Durant's that type of player. But what keeps him out the top 10 for me is that you didn't have those crowning achievements where you led a team. Like, yes, he was the best player, won 2 finals MVPs for his team. But there's a lot of people I have in front of him just for the simple fact that they did not lead their team, that he did not lead his team. There's little stuff like that that matter, the little nuances when breaking down players' careers and stuff like that. That's the one thing that I look at. Did you lead your team? Can I look at a sheet of paper and be like, yo, did you lead your team here? If the answer is no, I'm not going to put you ahead of him. Like, I don't have him. People might get gripey about this, might get pissed about this, but I don't have him above Moses Malone. I think Moses Malone gets ignored. Moses Malone was a 3-time MVP. Like, that's going to hold a lot of weight in my conversations when looking at all-time players. That's just the way it is for me. But on the bus driver comments, people are going to play coy to that and try to say that stuff doesn't matter and it's a team stuff and all this other stuff. But it's like, that's not how it goes. As a person who loves the game, follows the game, like, that's not how it goes, at least for me. Hopefully for other people it's not, because I feel like the game is more complex than that. Moving on, he doesn't agree with Chuck's approach to the game, and I kind of agreed with him like that. And he says, I respect Charles Barkley, especially when they were talking about Kevin Durant joining the Suns. He said, I respect Charles Barkley and what he's done for this franchise. Like, Charles Barkley was a man MVP, championship caliber player in that Phoenix Suns uniform. He says, I respect the hell out that guy. That's a legend in the game. But in terms of how he goes about analyzing the game, he's like, I don't really fuck with your approach. And I completely understood that from where he was talking about, where Chuck basically said, you got to pound these little guys inside, especially these jump shooting teams. You got to pound them inside and beat them up on the boards and all this other stuff. And it's like kind of what Damian Lillard said early in his interview, where, you're not going to win that way. The NBA has completely changed from where these guys, especially old heads, are kind of going, saying, you guys got to pound it inside and stop shooting so many threes. And it's like, well, when you face a team that plays defense and makes threes, Golden State Warriors, who we've seen throughout their whole entire run, it's difficult to win games. And I feel like that's something that gets lost a lot of the time, where Damian Lillard talk about this too, where he was talking about, I should have talked about this in the morning, but he basically talked about how they were facing Houston, modern day analytics team of the 2000s, right? The late 2000s, right? And he basically said, we were scoring a bunch of twos and we were having good runs, but it's like, we still ain't catching up. And he was talking about how PJ Tucker, Trevor Ariza, James Harden were basically just knocking down threes. And it's difficult to keep up. And JJ Redick talked about that as well, where they were facing Houston, ironically, and they're sitting there like, Paul, Blake were knocking down some runs here, but it's like, they were scoring as well, and they were knocking down threes. And it's a mathematical equation. I think that's what Kevin Durant was basically alluding to in terms of the approach to the game, or whatever the case may be, and how Charles Barkley thinks about the game. Like, you can't win like that anymore. Like, that's done with. That way of thinking about the NBA is just gone. Like, you can't win that way. You can't just be even when I think about it, how the approach to the game is Joel Embiid. People talk about him as a striking point. How he does and post up all the time, and he's taking jumpers and all this stuff like that. And how, but if you look at the dynamics of their team, if Joel Embiid is dominant inside, it has a lot to do with the outside shooting around him. You have to be able to knock down shots in this league. That's what it is. You have to be able to knock down shots. Yes, you have to be able to get stops and play defensively, of course, all the way. But when a lot of older guys talk about, yo, you can take a mid-range, you can do that too. But it's like that only helps if you're getting stops. Those shots are only available, those mid-range shots, those inside shots are only available if you have spacing. And that comes with what? Knocking down shots. And I think that was the big thing when Kevin Durant was talking about approaches and stuff like that and how they view the games and stuff like that, and how Charles Barkley kind of tears down a lot of people in his comments and stuff like that, giving his opinionated views. And it's like, I understand it from both sides where the media has to play a part and talk about how they view the game and see the game and how it should be played. And it's like, a lot of the times the game is ever evolving, changing. And I think a lot of times people fail to adapt with that. And that's a big issue. I feel like people need to adapt with the times and really understand how the game is being played. And a lot of people hate analytics and stuff like that. And it's just like, could there be a mass volume where there's too many teams taking too many threes at times? Yes, of course. Are there bad shot selections? Of course, that's going to happen. But that happened all the time. Just because a guy got an inside shot and a high percentage shot, a lot of the times those guys miss too. We've seen it over the course of history. A lot of guys miss easy bunnies, take mid-range shots, long twos. We see it with Toronto in those mid-late 2000s before they got Kawhi. Like DeMar DeRozan was pitiful. They were taking bad shots. Kyle Lowry taking bad shots in those mid-range areas. That really didn't pan out. And it just is what it is. We can look at throughout history. Like, a lot of teams take bad shots. And when you look at older teams, especially in the 80s and 90s and stuff like that, when you think about the way there's a talent discrepancy and how if teams would have stopped taking mid-range and maybe if they just took a couple threes, I remember Steve Nash was saying that, especially with his run with the Suns, it's like, yo, we should have doubled down, tripled down, took more threes because that was the way that we were going to compete. And it's just very interesting to think about the dynamics of the game. Hopefully I can talk about that at a later time, where the dynamics of the game have changed. And you think about all the teams that have lost or certain things like that, or dynamics of the court, where three-point shooting could have been a big factor at various times in NBA history. But that was a good interview as well. I suggest people check that out with Kevin Durant via Boardroom, via his Ethics podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe as we continue here. Jalen Rose sit down with Ja Morant. Ja Morant has been suspended by the NBA 8 games. He's already served 6 or 7, I believe, by the time this is coming out. I believe it should be done. I believe he'll be back on Monday, possibly with the team there as their game comes up. But the NBA suspended him 8 games. He's already served 7 or 8. It's about to be up during this time, especially with showing the gun and going live, showing the gun in Colorado, which really was a bad look for Ja Morant. And basically, Jalen Rose basically giving him this chance to basically talk about his transgressions and what happened during that night. And he said it was a bad decision. And basically, this is damage control on his point, right? Like, he has to basically try to show that he's changing, right? And he talked about in the interview how he said all the allegations over the past couple of weeks about the incident at the mall, the incident with the kid last year. These incidents happened last year, and most likely these are going to get settled and pushed under the rug and ignored, right? But these allegations coming up and then you're showing a gun on live and stuff like that, it's not a good look. And in the interview, he basically said, hey, those are lies, those allegations, or whatever the case may be. He basically playing damage control at this point. And how the gun wasn't his in Colorado. And he said that he's trying to play up an image and that he wasn't, that's not really who he is. He's basically on his, again, this is a media rollout. This is him trying to play damage control. And there's nothing wrong with that. I feel like Ja Morant should do that. You know, you have a lot to lose in the situation that he's like, I have a lot to lose and I have to think about who's around him in a circle and things of that nature. And I think that's what he should do. You know, I don't think people should be like, oh, he shouldn't have to do that or whatever the case may be. This is basically the media rollout. He has to kind of try to repair this, right? And the best thing for him is to get back on the basketball court. And that's basically what this was for. Trying to alleviate that process and basically get his feet wet integrated back into the NBA life, dealing with the media, and especially Jalen Rose being that first point of contact who has had his own transgressions in the past, being caught in drug houses in college and stuff like that, and other situations where he talks about that, where Jalen Rose really tried to speak to Ja Morant saying, hey, yo, you got to change your ways. I was in those situations. You do not want to do that, especially in this stage of your life where you're the breadwinner of your family, where you have so much untapped potential and so much more NBA career to go ahead, multiple checks coming. You got to think about that when you're going into this situation. And basically, you said the meeting with Alva Silva went well and how they were discussing his plan to get back into the NBA and stuff like that. And it's just like everyone's trying to kill Ja Morant right now. And everyone's just like saying, hey, coming quickly to, and I understand it. I understand it from that standpoint, but it's like we can only wait and see what he does going forward in terms of his approach to basically righting his wrongs in terms of having the gun, having that image of being a thug. You know, you have the incidents with Indiana where his guys were in the car with a laser pointer pointing at Indiana staff. The incident in the mall with his mother, basically coming with his family, basically rolling in 9 deep. They were saying multiple guys to confront this mall officer, whatever the case may be. Of course, the incident with the 17-year-old kid where they said he beat up a 17-year-old kid and stuff like that. So even if those things are transgressions or whatever the case, I believe they will be settled and we won't hear the light of day from it. But the only thing we can do is look at the path forward that Ja Morant takes. He doesn't get into more trouble. And he can kind of get back on the court. And I think that's the most important thing for him. I think that's the best place for him right now. Of course, the media is going to have a field day when he does actually come back. And hopefully they are able to get past that and he can continue to progress with the Grizzlies. But I think him basically addressing that, saying, hey, that's not who I am. That's not what I'm about. And it's like everyone's trying to kill him and say, yo, you're doing this stuff and being a thug and trying to be in the Crips and all this other stuff. And it's just like, yo, like, we got to give this guy a chance to redeem himself, right? Like, you can't just kill this guy for allegations and stuff like that. We actually have to see some type of progress here. And it's like, all we can do is wait and see. And I think people are sitting there where, on the flip side of that, where people are saying he did nothing wrong in terms of the gun and stuff like that in the club and stuff like that. And I'm like, it's just a bad look. the aesthetic of it is just not a bad look. Yes, of course, NBA players go to strip clubs. They go to entertainment places. They do things that we don't know about, kept under hush. But when he goes live and has a gun in a strip, like, what is the necessary point of that? It's just not a good look. And especially the NBA has tried to build up this image of getting away from that live gang culture, rap culture, all that stuff like that. And I think the NBA has done a good job. Like, yeah, you can have tattoos. Yeah, you can start wearing fashion again. Yeah, you can start doing this, and we can start talking about justice reform and stuff of that nature. That is something that's awesome for the NBA going forward. But all that stuff comes to a screeching halt when you're in a club and you have a gun in a strip club. That's just not a good look. It wasn't like it was recreational, like he was shooting in his backyard or going to a shooting range or anything like that. It just doesn't look good. That's the point of all that. Like, it just doesn't look good from that standpoint. And hopefully Ja Morant can put all that stuff behind him and move forward to on the basketball court, because the Grizzlies desperately need him, even though they're kind of up and down without him. Got a big win over the Warriors. But when you keep looking forward, it's like at some point you kind of got to put all that shit behind you and kind of just get it back on the court where the Grizzlies need you, where Ja Morant needs to really be, where he's flourishing, actually having a great season, all NBA season potentially. And for it to get derailed like this, I think that's one of the more unfortunate situations in the league so far, especially when the Grizzlies were playing so well. Especially they had some transgressions there with Steven Adams being out with his injury. But they need Ja Morant on the court. And I think Ja Morant needs to be on the court. And I hope Ja Morant can just get back to being on the court, like not having all this outside stuff. It's okay to party. It's okay to turn up. It's okay to have a good time. But when you get in those situations where all that stuff can be lost, all that stuff can be taken away, it's just not good for him. And I think that he has to find a way to basically put that behind him and get back on the basketball court. That's basically it. And Ja Morant's one of my favorite players in the league. Just want to see him be a good basketball player. Don't want to hear about all the off-the-court stuff of potential violence. And I think that was the main thing that the NBA tried to address, that they try to have the Grizzlies suspend him and try to get that put behind them. It's just like, the possibility that something could have happened. Not just to you, but innocent people in the strip club, in those places that you are. Innocent people can be hurt. A gun magnifies that. No gun lessens that. And I think that's something that the NBA basically was like, you got to kind of step back. And hopefully he does. Heading down the last couple of weeks of the NBA season here. Of course, I'm going to be touching back on that. Celtics lost tonight, which was a bad loss, of course. I believe they're 4-2 now on this road trip. They have the 3-2 on this road trip right now. They have the Kings on Tuesday night, I believe a TNT game that's going to be coming up. As well as check out the other videos I have there. I've been uploading shorts, and I feel like that's keeping people, while I was away a little bit, entertained a little bit. I also have ring takes. I have another episode coming up soon with Brian Lewis, where we talk about the road to WrestleMania coming up, of course. Check out those videos, of course. Listen, all that stuff. That will do it for episode 35 on the Basketball Soapbox. With the NBA season winding down, we're going to be talking more basketball, amongst other things. And thank you for joining and listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And that will do it for this one. Thank you for joining me.